There is someone you know, maybe someone you work with or see regularly, who seems to always get what they want, but in a way that feels almost invisible. People don't resent them for it. People don't see them coming. And by the time everyone realizes what actually happened, the person has already moved on to the next thing. They asked for something, and you said yes before you even realized you were saying yes. They wanted to be in a position of influence, and somehow, without anyone remembering how it happened, they ended up there. If you ask them directly what they're after, they'll give you an answer, but it's never quite the whole answer. There's always something underneath, some layer of intention they're not sharing, and somehow this withholding of full transparency makes them more powerful, not less. What would happen if you stopped telling people what you actually want? And why does transparency, which we've been taught to value, so often become a liability? The most destructive thing you can do in any competitive situation, and virtually all human situations are competitive at some level, is become predictable about your goals. The moment people know exactly what you're after, they can organize against you, they can block you, they can use that knowledge as a weapon. A person who says, I want to be promoted to that position has just handed everyone in the office a target to aim their resistance at. A person who says, I want a serious relationship with this person has just given that person the information they need to set boundaries or test the relationship's value. A person who says, I want to be the most respected person in this group has made it clear to everyone else that there's someone to watch, to contain, to possibly cut down. Transparency is a luxury item. It is a thing you can afford only when you are already so secure that people can't hurt you with your own stated intentions. And very few people are in that position, which is why the people who survive and thrive in competitive environments are almost always the ones who have learned to keep their actual objectives hidden. Let's be precise about what we're discussing here, because this is where people often misunderstand the strategy. Hiding your true intentions does not mean lying constantly or being actively deceptive in every interaction. That approach is exhausting and ultimately unsustainable. What it means is being strategic about which intentions you reveal, to whom you reveal them, and when you reveal them. It means understanding that not everyone deserves to know what you're really after. It means accepting that sometimes the most honest thing you can do is refuse to be completely transparent, because complete transparency in a world full of people working toward different goals is a form of self-sabotage. There is a difference between lying, which is actively misrepresenting reality, and simply not offering your full hand when you have no strategic reason to do so. One is dishonest, the other is strategic silence. And strategic silence is one of the rarest and most valuable skills a person can develop. Consider what actually happens physiologically and psychologically when someone knows what you want. Their brain immediately begins calculating how to either give you what you want in exchange for something they want, or to use your desire as leverage. If they're hostile, knowing your goal becomes a weapon. If they're neutral, knowing your goal allows them to set their terms. If they're friendly, knowing your goal still changes the dynamic because now there's a clear transaction happening rather than an open-ended relationship. The person who keeps their intentions to themselves remains in a state of possibility. People don't know whether you're a threat, an ally, a competitor, or something else entirely. And that uncertainty, that inability to pin you down to a clear agenda is actually the source of a tremendous amount of power, because people become more careful around uncertainty. They don't know how to treat you because they don't know what you want. Think about how this plays out in a dating context, because this is where the mask becomes particularly obvious once you know to look for it. The person who is honest and straightforward about being interested in someone, who is transparent about wanting a relationship or wanting to move things forward, has given that person information they can use. The other person now knows they are pursuing them. That person can decide whether to accept pursuit or reject it. They can leverage that knowledge. But the person who stays ambiguous, who is interested but not overeager, who genuinely seems like they might or might not want the same thing, creates a situation where the other person is actually more drawn to them, more curious, more invested. The ambiguity about intention creates an irresistible pull because humans cannot resist the urge to decode ambiguity. We are mystery-solving creatures. Show us someone with hidden intentions, and we will devote enormous energy to trying to figure out what those intentions are. In doing so, we become more invested in that person than we would be with someone who simply laid all their cards on the table. This same mechanism shows up everywhere. The person in the office who is obviously gunning for promotion seems threatening, and people organize to block them. The person who is competent but ambiguous about their ambitions, who never quite confirms that they want that promotion, even though their actions suggest they might be working towards something, that person generates far less resistance because people can't quite organize against someone whose intentions they can't pin down. The person in a negotiation who tells you upfront exactly what they need has handed you the information you need to either meet their needs or explain why you can't. The person who stays vague about their actual needs, who asks questions instead of stating positions, who seems curious about what you want but doesn't reveal what they want, that person maintains leverage throughout the negotiation because you are still unsure about what would actually satisfy them. Here's where this gets deeply psychological and why understanding this matters so much. Human beings have an almost irresistible urge to please people once we know what will please them. If someone tells us their goal, we automatically start considering whether we can help them achieve it, or whether they might compete with us for it, or whether we should get out in front of them. We start responding to their stated agenda. But if someone keeps their actual agenda hidden, if we don't know what will please them, we remain in a state of constant trying, constantly attempting to figure out what they want, so we can either help them or protect ourselves. And that constant trying, that state of not quite knowing, keeps us engaged and interested in a way that knowing the full story never does. The person who is mysterious about their intentions literally holds more of people's attention and energy than the person who has been transparent about their goals. But let's look at what happens in specific power contexts to see how this actually functions at a sophisticated level. In corporate hierarchies, the people who rise most effectively are almost never the ones who announce their ambition. They're the ones who seemed interested in the work, in contributing, in learning, but who never quite confirmed they were climbing the ladder. As they rose, it looked like circumstances were pushing them up rather than them pushing for themselves. This is vastly more politically effective than announcing your ambitions because it removes the threat response from people at your level and above. If you seem ambitious, they see you as competition. If you seem like you're just competent and things are working out for you, they see you as lucky or well-positioned or having good instincts, but not as a threat to preemptively knock down. In influence and persuasion, the most effective operators often work without revealing their ultimate objective. A person might advocate for a certain policy shift, not because it's the policy they actually want, but because implementing that policy creates the conditions for the policy they actually want to become possible. They keep their real goal hidden and build momentum toward it through a series of intermediate steps that seem to have independent value. By the time people realize what actually happened, the architect of the change is already positioned to benefit from it, and people can't really point to a moment where they were lied to because technically everything they were told was true, just not the whole truth. This strategy also manifests in something as everyday as conversation and social interaction. The person who asks a lot of questions while revealing very little about their own positions stays in control of the conversation. They learn what others want, what others fear, what others value, while giving away very little information about their own priorities. This asymmetry of information is power. They know you want approval, so they can offer it strategically. They know you're afraid of judgment, so they can either promise it or threaten it. They know your values because you told them, but you don't know theirs because they never fully stated them. And that asymmetry means that if a negotiation or conflict develops, they are already 3 steps ahead because they know what matters to you and you're still trying to figure out what matters to them. Now, here's something that most people are uncomfortable admitting. The people we often dislike or distrust are the ones who are most transparent with us. There's something about transparency that can feel threatening because it seems like it's asking us to do something, to respond, to take a position. If someone tells you exactly how they feel about you, you now have to deal with that information. You have to decide whether to reciprocate or to disappoint them. You are no longer free. But if someone keeps their feelings ambiguous, you remain free. You can interpret their behavior however you want. You can imagine that they like you, or that they're indifferent, or that they're testing you. That freedom is actually more comfortable than being confronted with someone else's clear intentions. This is why the person who is most vulnerable, most transparent, most emotionally open is often the least powerful in any relationship dynamic. They have surrendered the asymmetry of information that create power. Let's talk about how this actually functions at the level of daily strategy. Suppose you are in a meeting and there is a resource being allocated, an opportunity being decided, or a position being filled. If you advocate loudly for what you want, you've made yourself visible as a competitor. But if you stay quiet, ask thoughtful questions, seem interested but not invested, you remain in the shadows while everyone else is openly competing. Then at the crucial moment, you might casually mention something that suggests you'd be interested in this opportunity, but in a way that seems almost accidental, not like you've been working toward it the whole time. Or you might not even directly ask for it. You might simply position yourself as someone who could handle it and let other people suggest that you should be considered. By removing your obvious hand from the game, you paradoxically increase your chances of winning because you're not the person other people are organizing their resistance around. This becomes even more powerful when you understand what psychologists call the illusion of transparency. People massively overestimate how much others can read from their behavior. They think their desires are obvious, their intentions are clear, their hidden agendas are visible. But actually, most people are so focused on their own internal experience that they're barely noticing what's actually happening with you. You think people can read that you want the promotion. They're not actually paying that much attention. You think people know you're interested in someone romantically. They're probably not thinking about it. This massive gap between what you think you're broadcasting and what people are actually receiving is where real power lives. Position yourself strategically, move the pieces around, and most people won't even notice because they're not paying close enough attention, and you're certainly not going to help them by explicitly telling them what you're doing. Here's what makes this particularly sophisticated. The person who has truly mastered hiding their intentions doesn't actually think of it as deception. They think of it as appropriate boundary setting. They think of it as not oversharing. They think of it as maintaining professional distance or emotional wisdom. And in a sense, they're right. There's nothing dishonest about not volunteering information. There's nothing wrong with keeping your own counsel about your actual goals. But the effect is that while other people are being transparent and thus vulnerable and thus subject to being organized against, this person is moving through the world with a freedom that transparency never allows. People can't mount an effective defense against someone whose attacks they can't predict. People can't manipulate someone whose goals they don't know. People can't compete with someone whose competitive ambitions they haven't detected. But let's acknowledge what this costs, because there is a price to paying this kind of game. The person who is always masking their true intentions, who never fully reveals what they're after, who keeps people perpetually unsure about where they stand, does not develop the kind of deep, intimate relationships that many people crave. You can't feel truly close to someone if you can never be sure of their real intentions. There's a part of intimacy that requires knowing on some level that the other person wants what they say they want, that there's no hidden agenda being worked. So the person who is always playing the game, always masking, always holding something back, often ends up with relationships that are functional and beneficial, but never quite authentic. They have allies, not true friends. They have people who are useful to them, not people who love them. This is not a flaw in the strategy. This is just the honest price of it. However, there's a more sophisticated version of this that allows you to have both strategic power and genuine connection. This involves developing what you might call selective transparency, where you are fully authentic and honest with a small circle of people you genuinely trust, while maintaining strategic opacity with everyone else. The key is that the circle of trust is small enough that you're not exposing your intentions to people who might use that knowledge against you, but large enough that you're not completely isolated. You have people who know the real you, who understand your actual goals, who you can be fully honest with, and with everyone else, you maintain the mask. You are friendly, you are competent, you engage authentically in surface ways, but your deeper intentions remain your own. The people who seem to effortlessly rise in any environment are often the ones who have figured this out. They are genuinely nice, genuinely interested in others, genuinely helpful, but there's a core part of themselves, a true understanding of their own ambitions and fears that they keep to themselves. This allows them to move through the world without the constant friction that comes from people either resenting them or trying to help them or trying to block them based on knowing what they actually want. They're free to pursue their goals without the constant interference that transparency brings. And yet they also have genuine relationships with the people in their inner circle, so they're not isolated or lonely. Think about the most effective liars you know, the people who seem to always get away with things or always seem to know what to say. Often, it's not that they're lying constantly. It's that they understand the power of information asymmetry so completely that they never put themselves in a position where people have the full picture that would allow them to catch them. They might tell you truth that is technically accurate, but misleading by omission. They might ask you questions instead of answering your questions. They might seem to agree with you while actually maintaining a completely different position. And the most sophisticated ones do all of this while maintaining your trust because they're not actually lying in ways you can prove. They're just not being fully transparent about their intentions. This brings us to something almost paradoxical that you need to sit with. If you want real power, real influence, real ability to move through the world and accomplish your actual goals, you might need to become comfortable with the fact that the people around you will never fully know what you're after. You might need to accept that strategic opacity is not dishonest, it's just intelligent. You might need to stop feeling bad about keeping your true intentions to yourself. Stop thinking that you should be fully transparent, because that's what virtuous people do. Because virtuous or not, transparent people are vulnerable people, and vulnerable people are people who can be organized against. manipulated, and blocked. The people who are most free, most capable of actual movement toward their goals, are the ones who have mastered the art of being ambiguous about their intentions while remaining clear and decisive in their actions. Here's what should follow you now, the question that should live in your mind the next time you're about to tell someone exactly what you're after, the next time you're tempted to be fully transparent about your goals or your feelings or your ambitions. Do the people who need to know already know? Does this person have any reason to use that information against you? What would change if you kept this intention to yourself? And most importantly, what are you actually afraid of that makes you want to tell people